I'm going to be your host this afternoon. I'm the Key Account Manager at Nomasis, with topic being secure corporate access for mobile services. My agenda, factors involved in developing a successful mobile concept. I'm going to take 5 minutes each basically on the use cases, the requirements, governance, a little bit on the architecture, and basically how we go about implementing some of these solutions. Mobile enablement. Now, for me, providing emails to a few executive iPads, well, that's not mobile enablement, or let's say this is a mobile enablement that we've been doing for 10 years or so. Basically, I think today's smartphones, tablets, they are practical, easy to use, form factor, battery life, the end user basically likes it. I think there's data and research stating that the smartphone is our new endpoint and is soon to outnumber laptops. For sure, mobile enablement for me is to provide services that allow the end user to be more productive. And yeah, for this purpose, for sure, it takes more than just a device management solution. Maybe here my last point, just as when you manage your laptops and PCs, there's let's say a suite of solutions or an ecosystem of solutions, and I think more and more this is the case here as well. Mobile services. Mobile services that we provide to the end user, I think is quite an easy, let's say, topic. Today there's an app for that. We're providing PIM information, emails, unified communication tools, file share access, SharePoint, Office 365. The services that are provided are basically endless, and we're going to look at a few. I think probably the most interesting one today is the app distribution, and here for sure we could take a whole webinar to have a look at the implications and what needs to be done to secure and to distribute apps. Governance requirements. I think this is the first factor, thing that we need to look at when we want to provide secure access. And I think this slide here is a little bit, I think it's the last point is the most important point. User requirements, user expectation, and usability. For me, it's like that. If the user is not going to be able to use your solution or has different expectations or requirements, your project will not be successful. I think same goes for the legal requirements. If, today things like GDPR, privacy protection, if our solutions don't adhere to the legal requirements, basically no go, we cannot implement. Same with the internal policies. All architectures that we design, provide, implement, of course they have to implement your internal policies. So these are, I think, probably the most important parts that we need to look at. And with that, let's go into the architecture, if I can say it like that, and I'd like to show you the perfect architecture that takes into consideration your user requirements, expectation, legal requirements, allow to implement all of your internal policies. Yeah, but that's impossible. I'm not David Copperfield. This is an individual thing, but what I can show you is I can show you a little bit what the architecture looks like today. And I think ideally at some point we have a data repository where ERP, CRM, Exchange, files, documents are stored. I think this is ideal world where you have one repository. We see at international clients, big clients, that at times you have several different data repository locations. Then we have the big bad internet with all of its devices and users. We have cloud services that are being used, Salesforce, Google services, they're endless. They end up, they're just as popular as new apps. I mean, cloud services. If you don't use them now, you'll for sure need to use them, parts of them, in the future, time to come. We have information basically traveling in every direction, from the end device to your infrastructure, end device to cloud services to infrastructure. Basically, like I said, all directions need to be considered and secured in that sense. What I will do is I will look quickly at 3 points: identity, data leak prevention, security, and access. User identification. How do we go about? Is it an internal user? Is he known in the domain? Is it a partner company that may not be in your domain and just temporarily accessing your information? Or is it an external user, such as a broker or someone that just needs access to a particular service? So these are factors we need to take into consideration. And with that, we have to look at how does he identify himself and how do we authorize him. Basically, we cannot give a mobile user a 32-character password with special characters. This will not work at the end. These are considerations or factors that we have to look at in detail, and we have to define how users are identified, how are they authorized to access our infrastructure. Single sign-on for user experience. You can imagine if you have 4, 5, 6 different types of services that we provide to an end user, we don't want them to log in separately to each of the services. Rather, what we provide, what we need to provide more in the future is some sort of single sign-on solution, so that he can log in with a PIN, secured, and all of his business content is made available to him. Simplified user or device enrollment, big topic today. Things like DP from Apple or simplified enrollment from Google. These are factors we have to take into consideration and make it easier for the end user to access securely our infrastructure. Controlled access to cloud services. I think more and more we are starting to use cloud services we need to have a way to control access to cloud information, information being passed to the end devices and back to our infrastructure. So there is different tools available to perform these tasks, SAML services, Kerberos for SSO. Yeah, I think here basically the user identification and authorization topic that our consultants spent days at defining how users are identified, how are they given access, how do we go about providing these services transparent to the end user. Now to the device itself, data leak prevention, security. Here, I think first thing we need to do is we need to separate personal and enterprise data. There's various methods on how to do this. Sandbox, probably a more traditional type of solution where all of the services that we want to provide to our end user is put into a protected area on our device. Disadvantage there is that all services that you want to provide to your end user needs to be let's say developed especially for the container itself, for the sandbox. So newer, more modern approaches is to have logical containers and basically to control these open-in functions, control how information or how apps communicate with each other. We need to assess the device type or the platform that we want to deliver our services on. You have to imagine if you provide a service with an Android device or provide a service with an iOS device, technically what's underneath is completely different. These are two different platforms. They give us APIs accordingly, so things that are able to be done on one platform may not necessarily be able to be done on the other platform. And for sure, all apps and applications look different from one to the other. The endpoint security, malware detection. I think it's quite clear today, mobile devices are a gold mine for data. So, I mean, you have PIN information, email, credentials, passwords, you have hundreds of apps, and of course you got all the sensors, camera, the microphones, so on, location tracking sensors, so on and so forth. So here we want to the point we need to protect for mal apps. We need to make sure that the devices accessing our infrastructure, the operating system is not compromised. And I think the last point, or point that always gets forgotten, is end user training. I think I say the most dangerous is the user himself. He needs to be made aware what he is doing. Many times I see that end user doesn't realize that what he's doing and what he's able to do can compromise security. We can see, for example, Facebook. Everybody has Facebook on their device, but there's at least 10 or 15 different types of Facebook apps. So here, if the end user is made aware of what is, let's say, secure or what breaches security, he will not do it. So for sure, this is a important point that is to be put into the concept. Infrastructure infrastructure access, I think quite clear, only identified and authorized users shall have access to our infrastructure. But the other two important points is the secured and administered devices. We need to basically provide some sort of cycle management for the device, as well as for all the apps that we provide to the end user. This can be a very simple thing, or it can be basically a solution that starts at procurement, helps with enrollment, manages operating system releases, app releases, and at the end of the life cycle is to be removed and taken out of your infrastructure, basically. So here again, things that are underestimated, but for sure very important that that we take these points into consideration of providing a concept. So how do we go about implementing such a solution? And I think here it's relatively simple. We need to know on one side who is our users. Are they internal users, external users, partners, VIP, special cases? On the other side, we have the services. What service do we need to provide to what user? And then comes basically the next point, on what platform is this to be provided? And I think with the combination of this information, we can define or start define what type of infrastructure is needed. So basically here, if user group 1 has an app which allows file access, we have to basically analyze on what platform will he receive this information, and according to that information, we develop the infrastructure. So with other words, if you want to provide files and your solution is iOS compatible only, of course we can't give the user group 1 Android devices. And if that's the case, we don't even need infrastructure that supports Android devices. So I think with the combination of these factors, architecture can be developed, and these services may quite easily be implemented into any organization if you know your requirements, your legal adherence, and your internal policies. I think with that, I have already come to the end of my